The darkness of a Texan night in 1884 was absolute. A lone servant girl, barely 17, stumbled across her kitchen floor, candle flickering, unaware of the shadow lurking just beyond the doorway. A chill crawled down her spine. She had felt it before, a presence, a whisper of death, hovering at the edge of the room, and at the sudden flash of steel, pain, blood, screams that were swallowed by the silent, moonless night. Her life ended before the world could even understand what had happened. Outside, the city slept, oblivious to the horror within its very walls. This was the work of a killer who would terrify Austin for months, a figure history would remember only as the Servant Girl Annihilator. By the time dawn broke, another girl would be dead, and another. Austin, Texas, in the 1880s, was a city of contrasts. Dirt streets and gas lamps, wooden homes, and the occasional brick building. A town straddling the line between the untamed West and modernizing society. Servant girls, many young and vulnerable, populated households across the city, taking in laundry, cooking meals, and minding children while their employers slept. Life was harsh for women in these positions. Their isolation, their dependence on their employers, and the shadow of societal restrictions made them easy prey. The city was bustling yet complacent. People trusted their neighbors, believing crime was something that happened elsewhere, in the dark corners of larger cities. Austin would soon learn, horrifyingly, that evil could stalk even the most familiar streets. The first attacks were subtle. Broken windows, doors left unlocked, whispers of screams in the night. People dismissed these early signs as accidents, or perhaps the work of local mischief makers. But the brutality escalated quickly. Victims were bludgeoned, sometimes strangled. In some cases, their bodies were mutilated, eyes gouged, throats slashed, faces nearly unrecognizable. The press and the police were unprepared for a perpetrator this cruel, methodical, and invisible. The moniker Servant Girl Annihilator was coined in fear after repeated attacks on domestic workers, often in the privacy of their homes. The pattern was clear. The killer targeted young women, usually alone at night, and left behind a scene that was both grotesque and unnerving. It was a sweltering summer night when Margaret, a 19-year-old servant, prepared to light her lamp and settle in for the evening. The clatter of pots had faded, the household quiet. She did not hear the soft scuff of footsteps approaching through the hallway. A shadow fell across the wall, silent and predatory. In a moment, the serenity shattered. The killer struck swiftly, wielding a blunt instrument, delivering blows that ended her life in seconds. The candlelight caught the flash of blood, her scream cut short, her body slumping to the floor. The perpetrator vanished before a neighbor could hear or intervene. The city would awaken to horror yet again, its collective heart sinking. Another victim would be found the next morning, in similar circumstances, leaving investigators grasping at straws. There was no discernible motive beyond pure malice. No signs of robbery, no disputes, nothing that could hint at why these women were selected, or why the killer struck with such ferocity. The Austin Police Department was ill-equipped to handle a serial killer of this nature. Officers knocked on doors, took statements, and followed leads. But the criminal was always a step ahead. There were fleeting sightings of a shadowy figure, a man prowling near homes of servants, but nothing concrete. Residents became vigilant, walking streets at night with lanterns and makeshift weapons. Doors were bolted, and families huddled together. Fear permeated the air like a fog. Panic spread when rumors of the killer entering homes through windows and back doors circulated. No one felt safe, even in their own beds. The press, eager for sensational stories, stoked terror with lurid headlines. Murder stalked servant girls, one newspaper screamed, feeding both fear and fascination. Letters flooded the police department with tips and accusations. Some claimed to see strange men lurking near homes. Others insisted they had visions and dreams of the next victim. None were accurate. None led to the murderer. Over the weeks, the killings followed a pattern, yet it was unpredictable. The killer moved across neighborhoods, striking without warning. The brutality escalated. One young woman was found with her throat cut from ear to ear. Another's body bore signs of strangulation, her limbs contorted unnaturally. The city shuddered. Parents locked children indoors. Neighbors formed patrols. Lights flickered in windows as women stayed awake through long sleepless nights. The killer seemed omnipresent yet invisible, a specter haunting Austin streets. By the time of the fifth confirmed victim, hysteria had gripped the city. The servant girls' murders revealed the vulnerabilities of the working class. Poverty, social isolation, and gender made women easy targets. Community meetings erupted in anger and fear. Citizens demanded the police catch the fiend. The mayor issued public warnings, urging households to secure their doors and remain vigilant. Yet, despite growing fear and vigilance, the Servant Girl Annihilator continued to strike. No one could predict the next attack. No one could protect the city. And with each murder, the killer's audacity and brutality grew, leaving the entire city wondering, could this horror ever end? By autumn, the murders had left Austin paralyzed. The killer had struck with uncanny knowledge of the city's geography, slipping through streets and alleys unnoticed. Despite a flurry of investigations, interrogations, and newspaper speculation, the identity of the Servant Girl Annihilator remained a mystery. Was it a single man? Multiple perpetrators? A monster hiding in plain sight among the citizens? Every home felt unsafe. Every shadow sparked fear. And the most terrifying question lingered in the minds of every Austin resident. Who would be next? The city waited, trapped in a nightmare, while the killer vanished into darkness once more, leaving nothing but blood, fear, and unanswered questions. The air was thick and suffocating that September night. A young woman, barely 16, hurried through her dimly lit kitchen, broom in hand, cleaning the remnants of dinner. Outside, the city seemed to breathe silently under the weight of the moonless sky. Then a sound, soft, deliberate, echoed from the hallway. She froze, heart hammering, footsteps, faint but purposeful, approaching. Before she could react, the killer struck. The blow landed with a horrifying thud. Pain erupted. A crimson splash painted against the candlelight. Her scream, sharp and desperate, cut through the night, but fell on deaf ears. By the time a neighbor noticed the absence of light in her window, she was gone. Her life snatched in seconds. Austin awoke once again to horror, this time closer to the city center. Panic spread like wildfire. No home felt safe. No family felt secure. And the Servant Girl Annihilator remained free. The young women who perished were not merely statistics. They were daughters, sisters, friends. Sarah Jenkins, 17, worked long hours as a laundress, dreaming quietly of saving enough to start her own home. Her laughter, once common in the narrow streets of East Austin, vanished into silence, leaving neighbors in stunned grief. Lillian Hart, 18, had ambitions of attending finishing school, a dream cruelly interrupted by a blade in the night. Margaret Thompson, 19, a caretaker of 3 children, never returned home to tuck them in after dinner. Each victim shared a common thread. They were alone in their homes when the killer struck. Their vulnerability was exploited with brutal precision. The community began to whisper. This was no ordinary criminal. This was a calculating monster, almost surgical in the execution of his crimes. The Austin Police Department was desperate. Investigators pored over crime scenes, taking meticulous notes of broken doors, shattered windows, and objects displaced during the attacks. Yet, the killer left no fingerprints, no traces of a struggle beyond the horror inflicted upon the victims themselves. Some detectives theorized a man familiar with the city, someone who knew the layouts of homes, the comings and goings of families. Others speculated multiple perpetrators, working in tandem to spread terror. Yet no arrests were made. Every lead dissolved into frustration. Rumors began circulating about the nature of the attacks. Some claimed the killer had a fascination with the eyes of his victims, others with their throats. Newspapers printed chilling speculation, describing the crimes as the work of a fiend who haunts the shadows with a hatred for innocence. As summer waned into fall, Austin transformed. Families barricaded doors and windows with boards, lanterns burned through the night, and young women traveled only in groups, often escorted by older siblings or neighbors. Community watch groups formed, armed with revolvers, sticks, or simply the hope that numbers would deter the monster. Yet the Servant Girl Annihilator was elusive. He slipped past lantern light, bypassed armed citizens, and vanished into the city as silently as he had arrived. Every murder deepened the city's paranoia. Parents refused to allow daughters to work as servants. Young women no longer ventured out alone. A pall of fear settled over Austin, suffocating its bustling streets. Reports began surfacing of girls who had narrowly escaped the killer. One young servant reported waking to find a shadowy figure standing at the foot of her bed, watching silently. She remained frozen, too terrified to scream, until the figure left as silently as it had come. Another, awakened by strange scratching at a window, had glimpsed a man's face illuminated by the pale glow of a passing lantern. Her description, a thin, almost skeletal man with cold eyes, spread fear further. Yet it led to no arrest. The killer seemed to thrive on terror itself, each near miss amplifying the city's panic. The police were powerless, the press sensationalized the terror, and ordinary citizens began to arm themselves out of desperation. Detectives pursued every tip, no matter how absurd. A man matching a vague description of a tall, gaunt figure was arrested, interrogated for days, and then released for lack of evidence. A local laborer, accused by neighbors of lurking near servant houses, proved to be innocent. Even a wandering drifter whose presence in the city was poorly documented was considered but eventually dismissed. Each dead and increased the pressure on law enforcement. Newspapers reported with ever greater intensity, naming potential suspects, questioning police competence, and stoking public fear. Austin's social life began to unravel. Servant girls were pulled from households. Wealthy families relied on male laborers, friends and relatives doubled as protectors. Community gatherings were minimized, streets emptied after dusk, and trust frayed. People whispered of cursed homes and shadowy figures lurking just out of sight. The fear infiltrated every aspect of daily life. Markets closed early, children were kept indoors, and the sound of footsteps on wooden floors caused heartbeats to quicken. This was a city under siege, not by soldiers, but by an invisible predator who knew no boundaries. By the end of October 1884, the killings revealed a terrifying consistency. The Servant Girl Annihilator's methods were not random. Each attack was deliberate, each victim chosen carefully, and each scene left a signature. A horror that seemed intended to terrorize rather than satisfy any material motive. Detectives noted a psychological pattern. The killers struck young women in their homes, usually at night, and left behind evidence meant to shock. The community began to suspect a singular malevolent force, a person who thrived on fear, whose motives were beyond comprehension. Then one night, a scream echoed from the outskirts of East Austin. Neighbors rushed to the scene, arriving just as the killer disappeared into the darkness. The girl survived, but barely. Her testimony was fragmented, her terror indescribable. She described a man with eyes that burned like ice, moving like a shadow, striking without warning. Police had a glimpse of the monster's face, but could not act. Once more, the city realized the horrifying truth. The Servant Girl Annihilator was still at large, bolder than ever, and perhaps watching them even now. Austin's residents waited with bated breath, knowing the killer had not finished, knowing that the night still held danger. And the question that haunted every household lingered in every whispered conversation. Who is this monster? How many more must die before justice can catch him? The city slept uneasily, while in the darkness, the Servant Girl Annihilator planned his next strike. It was just past midnight when a faint cry pierced the quiet of a narrow East Austin alley. The moon, shrouded by clouds, barely illuminated the cobblestones, slick with summer rain. A servant girl, barely 17, huddled in the shadows behind a water barrel, hoping the darkness would conceal her. But he was there, the monster who had haunted Austin for months. He emerged silently, a figure cloaked in shadow, a blade glinting faintly in the faint lantern light. She could see him now, thin, gaunt, eyes reflecting an almost inhuman calculation. He lunged. She screamed, a sound that cut through the night like a knife. Desperate, she scrambled toward the street, adrenaline lending impossible speed to her legs. The attacker followed, but something strange happened. He hesitated, watching, calculating, as if deciding whether to strike. Then, with a flash, he vanished into the darkness, leaving behind only terror and the echo of his intent. The girl survived, but her testimony would only deepen Austin's nightmare. The killer was bold, meticulous, and seemingly untouchable. By late 1884, Austin was a city transformed. Households installed heavy locks, windows were barred, and families kept lanterns burning through the night. Servant girls, once trusted members of households, became symbols of vulnerability. Parents forbade daughters from taking domestic work, fearful of the invisible predator who stalked their streets. Communities organized patrols, walking the streets in pairs, clubs, or pistols in hand. Yet the Servant Girl Annihilator continued to elude capture. Fear seeped into every corner of the city. Even daylight could not quell the terror. Neighbors watched one another. Strangers were eyed with suspicion, and every shadow sparked anxiety. Austin law enforcement faced unprecedented pressure. Investigators painstakingly cataloged every murder scene, noting patterns. The attacks were almost exclusively at night. Victims were young women, and the perpetrator showed a preference for houses with easy access through windows or back doors. Detectives pursued every lead, yet nothing concrete emerged. Every suspect was released due to lack of evidence. Public frustration mounted, and newspapers seized upon every detail, sensationalizing the crimes and heightening fear. Headlines screamed, "Shadowy fiend strikes again. Who will be the next victim? Austin terrorized by unknown murderer." The press inadvertently amplified the killer's power. Panic spread like wildfire, leaving families in constant fear, and the killer, if he read the newspapers, would have been emboldened by the city's terror. Despite the chaos, patterns began to emerge. The Servant Girl Annihilator struck in clusters, often targeting homes on the outskirts of town or along poorly lit streets. Attacks were swift, brutal, and seemingly random to the untrained eye, but investigators noted a signature in the brutality. Victims were often attacked while sleeping. Throats were slashed with precision, and in some cases, mutilation suggested a perverse fascination with fear and control. These murders were not the work of a man seeking gain. This was a predator driven by something darker, a desire to terrorize, dominate, and control through violence. The city, its institutions, and its people were caught in the grip of a predator whose motives defied reason. Austin's social fabric began to fray. Parents clutched daughters tightly, neighbors patrolled streets in groups, and servant girls were pulled from employment in households across the city. Markets closed early. Evening gatherings dwindled. People whispered of cursed homes and shadowy figures watching from alleyways. Some citizens took matters into their own hands. Vigilantes formed, scouring streets and back alleys, questioning anyone they found suspicious. Yet the killer remained elusive, slipping through the city like smoke. Each failed capture only deepened fear, reinforcing the idea that the Servant Girl Annihilator was omnipresent and unstoppable. Investigators chased every lead, some legitimate, some laughable. A man was arrested for loitering near several crime scenes, released when evidence proved circumstantial. Another suspect, described as tall and gaunt, was apprehended and held for days before being cleared. Local vagrants were interrogated, questioned, and dismissed. Every failed lead fueled public distrust in law enforcement. Letters poured into the police station from terrified citizens, claiming to have seen the killer or known his identity. But none of the tips produced results. The city's frustration mounted, and the killer's shadow only grew longer. Historians analyzing the case note the psychological complexity of a Servant Girl Annihilator. He was bold yet methodical, striking with precision, and leaving victims in ways that maximized terror. Unlike other criminals of the time, there was no financial gain, no revenge. Only the act itself, cold and calculated. The near misses of survivors highlighted his cunning. He struck where he was least expected, then vanished before capture. Even in the streets, vigilance offered little protection. The city learned a terrifying lesson. This killer was not constrained by the same rules as ordinary men. The girl who survived the late September attack became central to the investigation. Her description, though fragmented and terrified, painted a chilling portrait. A man, thin and elongated, with an almost skeletal frame, eyes cold, calculating, seeming to pierce through darkness itself, hands quick and precise, able to wield a weapon with deadly skill. Yet even with this description, police could not identify him. Witnesses rarely saw him more than a fleeting second. His ability to blend into shadows, to strike and vanish, added to the city's terror and enduring mystery. By winter 1884, Austin had changed irrevocably. Streets once alive with the sounds of children playing and merchants shouting were eerily silent after dusk. The city's heart pulsed with anxiety, each household locked and guarded. And yet, the Servant Girl Annihilator had not been captured. He had eluded every trap, outsmarted every officer, and left a trail of blood and fear in his wake. Historians still debate his identity. Was he a transient? A local man hiding in plain sight? Or something darker? A figure of instinctual malice operating beyond comprehension? One fact remained undeniable. The killer had transformed Austin, leaving a permanent scar. And the question that haunted every resident, whispered in fear behind closed doors, persisted. Will he strike again? Austin's shadows stretched long and deep, holding secrets the city would never fully uncover. And somewhere in the darkness, the Servant Girl Annihilator waited. The city had learned to sleep lightly, if at all. One frigid November night, a young maid, Elizabeth, awoke to the sound of soft scratching at her bedroom window. Candlelight trembled against the walls, as she froze, heart pounding. The scratching intensified. A shadow loomed, blacker than the night itself, pooling in the corner of her room. Before she could scream, the figure vanished, swift, silent, gone into the night. The terror lingered in the room long after he disappeared. Elizabeth survived, but Austen knew, with growing dread, that the Servant Girl Annihilator had not yet finished his work. Every home, every shadow, every night carried the potential for horror. By the winter of 1884, the murders abruptly ceased. No one saw him leave. No evidence explained the sudden stop. Some theorized he died, moved away, or was imprisoned for another crime. Others whispered darker possibilities. He had blended into the community, waiting patiently, biding his time. Despite intensive investigations, the identity of the Servant Girl Annihilator was never discovered. Austen was left with scars both visible and invisible, and a legacy of fear that endured for decades. Families had rebuilt, streets had been repaved, and the city had modernized. But the shadow of those months of terror never truly lifted. Historians and criminologists have debated for over a century. Some suggest he was a transient, someone passing through the city with a violent obsession. Others believe he may have been a local man, integrated into the very neighborhoods he terrorized, allowing him to move freely and strike without suspicion. Modern criminal profiling paints a chilling picture. The killer likely exhibited traits of psychopathy, charming or inconspicuous in public, but capable of extreme violence when alone with the victim. The methodical nature of the attacks, combined with the careful evasion of law enforcement, suggests intelligence and planning far beyond a mindless predator. Yet, every theory remains speculative. No confession, no arrest, no definitive clue was ever discovered. The Servant Girl Annihilator remains one of America's earliest and most perplexing serial killers. His identity hidden in history, his methods terrifyingly ahead of his time. The murders forever changed Austen. Houses were redesigned with stronger locks and barred windows. Families became wary of servants and strangers alike. Social trust frayed. Women's vulnerability became a constant concern, prompting shifts in employment practices and neighborhood vigilance. The fear that gripped Austen was more than a reaction to murder. It was a recognition that evil could exist unseen, that the ordinary world could hide extraordinary horror. In this way, the Servant Girl Annihilator shaped the city's social fabric, creating a culture of caution and suspicion that lingered long after the killings ended. Even today, the case fascinates true crime historians. It represents one of the earliest documented serial killer sprees in the United States, predating Jack the Ripper and others who would terrify the public decades later. The brutality, randomness, and elusiveness of the killer set a precedent for understanding serial predation in urban environments. The Servant Girl Annihilator's crimes are remembered not for resolution, but for the terror they sowed, the unanswered questions, the missing justice, and the lives cut tragically short. He remains a ghost in Austen's history, a figure who exists only in newspaper accounts, survivor testimonies, and the imagination of those horrified by his deeds. Even as Austen modernized, repaved its streets, and grew into a larger city, the shadow of the Servant Girl Annihilator lingered. Could he have struck again elsewhere? Did he die unnoticed, or was he hiding in plain sight? Perhaps most chilling of all, the case is still unsolved. Over 140 years later, experts debate who he was, why he struck, and how he vanished so completely. And for every person who reads the story, the terror remains immediate, visceral, and haunting. Some monsters leave without a trace, and some may still be out there, unseen, waiting in the dark. Austen sleeps cautiously even now, its streets haunted by the memory of a killer who was never caught. The Servant Girl Annihilator's identity may never be known, but the fear he created endures, etched permanently into the history of the city.